Old Hollowshade Cemetery in Charleston had always been a quiet, forgotten place, hidden behind rusted iron gates and overgrown oaks dripping with Spanish moss. It wasn't on any tourist map. Locals barely mentioned it, aside from a few ghost tour guides who liked to embellish stories about witches and wandering Civil War soldiers. But one grave began drawing attention. It started when Nora Jenkins, a gardener for the city's historical society, noticed something strange while trimming back the ivy on the northern edge of the graveyard. One of the graves, an old, cracked headstone with no name, looked taller. Not by much. Maybe an inch or two. She brushed it off as soil erosion or ground settling, but when she came back a week later, it was taller again. The dirt around it looked disturbed, like something was pushing up from underneath. People began to joke about it on local forums. They called it the growing grave and made memes about buried giants or vampires standing up slowly over time. But then a kid named Luke, while sneaking into the cemetery one evening on a dare, swore he saw bones. Fresh ones. Pale, clean bones rising just above the soil, like they had been buried yesterday, not decades ago. The next day, the police were called. They dug down 4 feet. Nothing but old soil and fractured roots. No coffin. No corpse. Nothing to explain the skeletal hand sticking out the night before. And yet, the grave was visibly higher than any around it. Dr. Elijah Mallory, a reclusive local historian known for researching Charleston's darker corners, took interest. He had seen strange things in his time, secret tunnels beneath churches, documents about sunken prisons, whispers of occult gatherings in the marshes, but this grave was different. He visited the cemetery with a tape measure, a drone camera, and a notebook filled with pages of old graveyard registries. The headstone bore no name, just a deep gouge in the stone and a strange symbol at its base. An ancient spiral. He measured the grave's height from the surrounding lawn, exactly 5 feet, 7 inches. 2 weeks later, it was 6 feet, 3. He installed a motion sensor night camera, tucked it into the twisted branches of a cypress tree. What he saw chilled him to the bone. At exactly 2:33 a.m., the grave shifted. The soil stirred. And something clawed from underneath, just a hand at first. Thin, pale fingers. They dragged against the dirt, pushing upward. But never fully emerging. The figure never left the grave. Each night, the same thing happened. He slowed the footage. The creature didn't blink. It didn't breathe. And worst of all, its face, when it barely crested the soil, was identical to his. Elijah staggered back from the screen. The spiral on the gravestone pulsed in his memory. He wasn't just watching a haunting. He was being watched back. Elijah dug deep into local history. The grave, according to the 1789 burial records, belonged to a man named Elias Moorcroft, a minor landowner and occultist who had disappeared under suspicion of human sacrifice. The church elders of that era had sealed his grave with iron nails and stone sigils. They feared he had made a pact with something buried far deeper than hell. Something that wanted to rise. Elias had vowed before he died that he would come back, but slowly. He believed time itself could be twisted. That if his body rose a few inches each day, reality wouldn't notice until it was too late. And now it was happening. The spiral on the gravestone wasn't decorative. It was a time marker. A countdown. Elijah visited the grave again. It was taller. So tall, it now looked like a monument. Soil had erupted around it like something huge was climbing out, inch by inch. And that night, Elijah received a call. It was his voice on the other end. "You shouldn't have watched the footage," it said. "You let me remember." The news spread like wildfire. Grave watchers came with flashlights and cameras. Some laughed. Some dared each other to step onto the mound. But by then, the soil was cracked. The spiral on the stone had started spinning slowly each night, glowing faintly. At 2:33 a.m., as always, the grave stirred. But this time, it didn't stop. The hand rose. Then the arm. Then a shoulder. And then, in a slow, unnatural movement, something stood from within the grave. It was tall. Bone-thin. Wearing the rotted remains of 18th-century burial clothes. Its eyes were empty. But the crowd screamed for a different reason. It looked exactly like Elijah Mallory. The creature looked across the cemetery, locking eyes with him. Then it smiled. Not with joy, but with recognition. Elijah dropped to his knees as memories not his own began to flood his mind. He remembered being buried. He remembered the pact. And he remembered clawing. Every night. For centuries. The townsfolk fled. But the grave didn't sink again. It remained open. And the creature, now walking freely, began digging another grave right beside it. That night, Elijah vanished. The next day, a new grave stood next to the tall one. Freshly packed. Marked with a name that hadn't existed until now. Elijah Moorcroft. And as the locals fled Charleston's edge, a new spiral appeared on the second grave. The countdown had only just begun.